The 18th century, grains played a very important part, especially small grains, as we call it. It happens to be barley. Matter of fact, around here, which we're in Montgomery County, more small grain than anywhere else was grown. So much so that the grain production here helped the Europeans for the Great Famine. A lot of grains were shipped out of Delaware and Philadelphia ports to Europe. Today on the Taste of History, we're making my unique 18th century beef barley soup. We make a pork ragout and the very special Lunn dumpling to give you a taste of history. Today I'm cooking at the historic Harriton House. Well, there are many recipes for beef barley soup you can find everywhere. I'm sure none of it as exciting as mine. Just kidding. But actually, what I'll recommend to do is that you cook the barley separate. Barley has a lot of starch. And if you follow some of the recipes where you put the barley right in together, the soup kind of becomes very cloudy. I like mine more thinking of a one meal stew type, or a one pot meal, if you will. And therefore, I'm taking the barley and cook it separately. It takes quite some time to cook barley, up to maybe 45 minutes, depending what barley you get. In most supermarkets and grocery stores, you'll find it. Look for when it says rolled barley. So this barley, I have some water right behind me, just salt water, I'm throwing it right in. Well, there are many recipes that vary and give you different ideas of what kind of meat to use. I personally like to use short ribs. Two reasons. One, not too long for cooking time, lots of flavor. This particular one happens to be what you call the whole rib, short rib, and all I want to do is cut it right down. Look at how the marbling is very, very important. Now it's readily available in most of the supermarkets and your butcher shop. I don't necessarily know if you're going to get the long size, you get all the short one, but it will not change the flavor. So all I'm going to do is take the short ribs, I'm doing a little bit of root vegetables. By root vegetables mean maybe a little bit of parsnip, a little bit of leek, maybe a couple of carrots, and some bay leaf, a couple of cloves, there we go, and sprig or two of thyme, and some peppercorns. And all you want to do is put that in a nice big pot with boiling water. And now we're going to let this boil for approximately 45 minutes at a roll boil. Notice that the vegetables in there are big chunks, big pieces, just for the flavor. In my way of the recipe, I'll saute the vegetables that are already cut separately and then add it all in together to get this unique flavor, and also to allow my vegetables to stay a little bit more al dente. Now I'm getting ready to what I call the assembly of the soup. I already have my root vegetables cut. Now I'm going to cut some mushrooms, just really quick. You can cut it either way you want to do it, just a quick slice. And I'll have a spider, and the fire already getting warm. There's a couple of ways you can do it. You can use oil, you can use butter, but also it's nice if you have some schmaltz available. I have to have some chicken schmaltz, which is rendered chicken fat that I use, gives it a little extra flavor, especially for a cold winter day. Okay, and now comes my vegetables right into the spider. The difference is when you cook it this way. If you follow my recipe, the difference is that the vegetables stay crunchy or al dente, and therefore you have a much better flavor of the soup later on. So just follow me. As we all know, vegetable is about 80% water. So all I'm doing right now is I'm kind of sauteing the vegetable gently to get some of the water out and enhance the flavor. While the vegetable is cooking, I'm going to get the beef off the fire and start chopping down some of the beef ribs for the soup. How beautiful is that? So I'm cutting that into generous chunks. Beautiful. The vegetables are almost ready. Maybe just a little bit more. So now I'm going to add the stock, that's right here, in on top of the vegetable. It's gorgeous stock, obviously it's reduced down. I'll add in the barley and the beef, and the soup is done. So let me take this over there right now. Oh. So barley was used as a side dish, was used as starch. Beautiful. I serve barley, and people always tell me how great my rice was, and I don't even serve any rice. So barley was used for this. Kind of forgotten in our days, except people that make a home brew with beers use barley and hop. But the barley itself is just unique and very flavorful. The dish today we make, and obviously would have been served at many times only as a meal, as I said earlier, maybe with a big slab of bread on the side. And what's unique about it is, in my way of doing it, that the vegetables keep their complexity and stay al dente, not all cooked together. If you throw it all in one pot before, including the barley, it becomes a cloudy soup. Mine is going to be clear, more transparent, more elegant. Elegant, like I would think Charles Thompson and Thomas Jefferson would have expected here from their chefs. I got some parsley I've chopped. I got a short rib, goes right in there. So the barley now is cooked enough. Look at that, how beautiful. I just add it into my soup, and see here, spectacular flavors. The root vegetable, the barley, the stock, the beef. It doesn't get better than that. Charles Thompson, you must have been a lucky man to eat this kind of soup in your house. Delicious. What kind of sheep do we have here?
These are an English breed of sheep called Leicester Long Wools.
That's funny.
Leicester Long Wool was developed in the 18th century. They were developed in England by a man named Robert Bakewell. He wanted to produce meat on an animal that grew very rapidly, and one of his very famous sayings was, "I want to put 2 pounds of meat where there's only been 1 before." Up until Bakewell's time at the end of the 18th century, livestock was named for the region they were from. So you had regional types, but you didn't have a breed. And this is the beginning of all modern animal livestock production. The work that he did influenced Charles Darwin and Gregor Mendel when those two men were trying to understand how genetic information passes from one generation to another. George Washington was very interested in Bakewell's work, and he actually wrote about Bakewell in a number of his letters. And we know he had some of these sheep. Now, Washington was actually very interested in wool production much more than meat. Bakewell was really looking at these animals as meat producers.
Elaine, you have such a wealth of information.
This is a fighting cock, and cockfighting, having 2 roosters fight, was an extremely popular sport in the 18th century, second only to horse racing. And it's something that everybody in the society, men, women, young, old, white, black, rich, poor, everybody went to the cockfights at least once in their life.
He picked me.
No. Oh.
Stay there, buddy. Yeah, go ahead. All right, I got my sets here. Now I'm getting ready for my pork ragout. Well, every chef has favorite dishes, and many chefs claim many. I claim many too, but this happens to be one of my favorite. Short of that, sometimes you do it with the bone and sometimes without the bone. Today, it's lifestyle, it's a little easier. Besides, if you make it on the bone, you have to find a specialty butcher that can cut it you in the bone. So I'm using a boneless pork shoulder, readily available in every supermarket, in any butcher shop. The reason you want the pork shoulder, because again, you're looking for meat that has some fat to it, because the flavor wouldn't be the same otherwise. So what you're going to do, cut a nice chunk of that, and basically you want to be very generous. If you like smaller pieces or larger pieces, it really doesn't make a difference. You're the boss, kind of whatever you prefer. I like this chunk, maybe 1.5 inches by 1.5 inches or 2 by 2 is perfect. What you want to do is, you want to have all your stuff ready. You need a good sized hot pan, because the one thing you want to do, you want to sear this meat relatively with some good heat on it to keep the liquid inside. Let me get my pot. Let me move this down below. I'm going to put just some salt on here. And cracking a few peppercorns in my mortar just a little bit just to open some. Beautiful. There we go. You want to have it nice and hot. Put a little bit of schmaltz in it, or you can use butter or oil. Again, really there is no particular right or wrong. And then you want to add in your pork. The beauty when you cook with Dutch pots, as you can tell how well they retain the heat. So now you just put this back on the fire. All right, I got the pork on the fire, looking good. Now I'm getting ready for the rest of the recipe. The recipe calls for bacon. Me personally, I love slab bacon, which is basically no different than the whole bacon that you use. Cut a piece down. Again, there now comes what you prefer. The bacon is just for enhancement of more extra flavor. I like this one here, maybe a small slice. Gets good flavor into it. And not much more than that, because it's basically just a little bit of extra flavor enhancer. The pork itself, the recipe does not call for any flour. However, in the end, if you think it's too liquidy, you can tie it up with some cornstarch or arrowroot like they did in the 18th century. But basically, the onion is what holds it all together. An onion is almost like when you make a goulash in German cooking or many other dishes where the onion becomes the binder. In other words, you need a lot of onions as the recipe calls for. If you make the recipe with 6 pounds of pork, you use almost 5 pounds of onion, almost half and half. So the onion gets chopped coarse like that and right into the pot together with the bacon. And garlic that I already have chopped. This is the stew just sizzling away in my Dutch pot. I'm going to get it right now. Red wine into it. The sugar that comes out of the meat sits on the bottom of the pan. You want to loosen it up. We call it deglazing. You want to be generous with the red wine. The recipe calls for a whole bottle. When buying red wine, buy something good. I always tell people, buy wine that you would drink. Don't buy anything that you wouldn't drink, and it's perfect. So then the red wine in here. Now, I got a bay leaf. I have some paprika. If paprika goes into it, you have to be keeping an eye on it because paprika has a tendency to burn quickly. So put paprika into it. This happens to be Hungarian paprika. Then I have some sage, just rubbed sage. And believe it or not, for this particular recipe, I prefer dry thyme. Sometimes I use fresh thyme, sometimes I use dry thyme. For this particular recipe, dry thyme works better. It has just more flavor into it. Before I put it back on the fire, I want to tell you quick, there's many variations you can do. Happened that out here in the woods, the Harriton House, a lot of mushrooms go around here. Obviously I have chanterelles. Basically today what I would add into it, throw it right into it at this stage of the game, because they're really firm, hold up really good. So with the mushroom into it, this happens to be a sap, I would just cut it up, big pieces, just throw it into the stew. And now all you would have to do, get a little more salt into it, salt, a little bit more white pepper, we have peppercorns into it, mix it all up, and basically I'll say about 30 minutes or so, now on a not too high of a fire at this point. You don't want the paprika to burn. We're fortunate today to be in the palace kitchen where they have an actual working gigantic spit. Spit roasting isn't something that just got invented a couple of years ago. Spit roasting has been around for a long time. We're fortunate to have Rob with us, who is the spit roasting expert here at the Palace Kitchen in Williamsburg, who's going to show us how this is actually done. Rob, you take it.
Thank you, sir. The spit we're working with today is referred to as a tine spit. You have the adjustable tines here, the forks. When you're roasting, you want to get it balanced, because if you don't get it balanced, it wants to wobble. When we get it onto the spit, you don't get a good even roast on this. That's about as good as we're going to get with this particular cut of meat. From here, we're going to be placing it onto our andirons and then hooking it up with the belt. We have a pulley on the end here. Get it wrapped around. And our clock check here, much like any sort of clockwork mechanism. The clock check itself has been dated at least to the second half of the 1300s.
Well, it's from France.
Yeah.
That's where they started.
On up the weight. Set everything into motion, and then make sure everything's turning as evenly as possible. Today we're going to be basting with butter, and that's the one thing we see in a lot of 18th century cookbooks, that an awful lot of butter is being used. That's love right there.
And no calories.
No, we haven't invented them yet. There is no such thing as cholesterol calories in the 18th century.
I know.
If you roast it properly, you should have a nice well done on the outside and almost blood rare in the center. Yeah, which I tell folks, visitors coming through, you haven't lived until you had a truly roasted piece of meat like this, because you really can't beat it.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Today, we're using the Lunn bread. In the city tavern, we bake it historically correct in a bun tin, so it looks like so. For the purpose of the dumpling, I made it in what we call a Pullman, as you're familiar with, like a sandwich loaf. But before we get started on cutting the bread, important is that the onions and the bacon that is part of the recipe has to be sauteed. Why for this? Because the onion could very easily ruin your entire recipe. So I have a little bit more chicken schmaltz. You can use oil, you can use butter. You have a nice hot pan. If you make this recipe, I recommend that you do this particular step ahead of time. So the day off, you maybe early morning, you want to do that and let it get cold. The colder and the better off you are with the onion and the bacon melted down, the better off and better, more success for your recipe. All you want to do is no color on the onion, just translucent. You just want to get the acidity and the extra liquid out of it. You may have difficulty finding a Lunn in your neighborhood grocery store, but have no fear, you can do that with a sandwich bread or with a baguette as well. It works both ways. For a bread like that, I don't even bother taking the crust off. Now, some recipes you want to take the crust off. I like the crust right on there because it works extremely well with this recipe, not a problem. You're going to make a dice out of it. Very simple. You want to just cut it, dice it, and throw it in a bowl, and then comes the big trick. And the big trick is that what happens in bread, what binds the bread is the gluten. And when you do bread like that is stale, like this bread that you normally would use, you use a couple-day-old bread, like a French bread or a sandwich bread, you want to make sure that you reawaken the gluten. And how do you awake gluten? You awake the gluten by putting a little warm milk into it. So what I got here is I have a little milk that's already warm. Put a little bit milk in there, a little bit. Okay. My onion mixture is ready. Let me go get it. Just perfect. Whew. Have some parsley I have chopped already. Then comes a very important ingredient of this recipe. This is the nutmeg. And nutmeg you will never want to buy ready ground. You take it and you shred it yourself in fresh. Gives tremendous flavor. Oh, it's just beautiful. Nutmeg in here. Pepper. Again, no black pepper. You don't want to see the black spots in it. Couple eggs. So then you want to mix this up really good. That you consistency. If it gets too wet, then you put too much milk in it. You're in trouble. You want to make sure that you keep with a little bit of milk at a time. You can always add, but you can never take away. So when you have it like that, just get it more firmer, and it will look just like so. I'll take a napkin. Then I'll take my appareil inside there and put it into the napkin. Like so. And I'll just move this to the side. Now roll it over really good. Take some butcher twine. Tie in one end. And tie in the other end. And then you have your Stellino sausage, right here. That's it. Now, we take this in the water and We boiled it for about 30 minutes at a low boil. Lunn dumpling is done. Take about a half an hour. Let me get it out. All right. And here we go. Now all we're going to do, obviously, is cut the ends off. Don't use your mother's tablecloths when you make that. You might get in trouble. You can also use cheesecloths for it. Doesn't have to be just a napkin. Napkins actually works a little better. I have a bladder here. And what you would do, lay it out. Isn't it beautiful? I get to use china that was used at the Harriton House. It's part of the artifacts here. That's a great place. Chicken schmaltz. You can use pork. You can use fat. You can use butter. Anything schmaltz. The chicken schmaltz. That's just a nice flavor. I put this back on the fire. And now we're going to have some breadcrumbs. Again, the breadcrumbs from the Lunn. So basically you have the Lunn in the dumpling and you have breadcrumbs. So all I'm going to do with the breadcrumb, I'm going to put a breadcrumb into the schmaltz, get a little bit of heat to it, very lightly toasted, and then drizzle it right over the beautiful dumplings. Yeah, perfect. Look at that. Perfect. Beautiful. Beauty, beauty. So what I'm going to do now is take a little bit of this right over the dumpling. This is it, I tell you. It's just a beautiful thing. Parsley on top. Oh, here you have it. Lunn dumpling. Easy, rolled up in a napkin, poached in the liquid, served up, a little butter, or schmaltz with a little breadcrumbs on top, some parsley. Delicious eating, and I tell you, it goes divine together with the pork ragoût we made earlier. Enjoy it. Bruce, finally got my cooking done.
Oh, Walter, you're bringing pork in. That looks great.
But speaking of food, what we did here, we did obviously a very unique beef barley that is actually more of a stew than it is kind of a soup. It would have been most likely a supper served at 4 o'clock with a slab of bread. Obviously the pork stew that is done without flour. It's just pork, onion, paprika, some sage, some thyme. Very beautiful dish again. So this is one of the ways to do a dumpling that is rolled in a napkin, poached and then sliced up, and has little schmaltz and mozzarella on top. It's just one of my favorite dishes. That's why I'm so proud to show it to you. But let's try some of the dishes we make.
Absolutely, I hope so.
Try the soup. A little pork ragoût here.
Oh, it's wonderful.
Oh.
Absolutely wonderful.
Join me
find
and a toast to Charles Thompson, to Thomas Jefferson, and to you, Bruce Gill, to letting us into your fantastic estate to make this happen and show the world that 18th century food is nothing but the finest, as we've seen here today.
It is
and
indeed.
And a taste of history.